What happens when the most dangerous man in New York gets told no by the woman cleaning his floors? You'd expect violence. You'd expect her to disappear. But when a billionaire mafia boss's proposal was rejected by a poor maid, his retaliation didn't just break the underworld, it shocked the entire world. High above the chaotic streets of Tribeca, on the 89th floor of an ultra-exclusive glass high-rise, Clara Hayes spent her days erasing the sins of the untouchable. At 24, Clara was a ghost. Employed by Elite Domestics, a private staffing agency that catered exclusively to New York's top 0.1%, she was trained to see everything and say nothing. And in the $30 million penthouse she was assigned to, there was a lot to see. The sprawling triplex belonged to Damien Russo. To the public, Damien was a ruthless venture capitalist, a fixture in Forbes and the CEO of Russo Holdings. He wore bespoke Tom Ford suits, drove a matte black Aston Martin, and dined with senators at Le Bernardin. But to the people who actually ran the city, the cops on the payroll, the district attorneys looking the other way, and the rival syndicates bleeding out in the shadows, Damien was the undisputed head of the modern American Camorra. He was a billionaire mafia boss who ruled the eastern seaboard with a velvet glove and an iron fist. Clara knew who he was. All the maids whispered about the sudden disappearances of Russo's business partners or the times they had to scrub strange rust-colored stains out of the imported Persian rugs in his private study. The other staff members trembled when Damien walked into a room. They kept their eyes glued to the baseboards, terrified that looking at him the wrong way would be their death sentence. But Clara didn't have the luxury of fear. She had Tommy. Tommy was her 6-year-old brother, currently lying in a sterile room at Mount Sinai Hospital, fighting a rare form of leukemia. Clara worked double shifts, scrubbing marble countertops and polishing crystal chandeliers until her fingers bled, just to keep up with Dr. Gallagher's mounting medical bills. Survival left no room for intimidation. For the first 3 months, Clara and Damien never crossed paths. He was a phantom who left behind the scent of expensive cigars and Baccarat Rouge cologne, and she was the phantom who cleaned up after him. But that changed on a stormy Tuesday night in November. Clara had been asked to stay late to clean the private library after a high-stakes meeting. The room smelled heavily of scotch and tension. She was on her hands and knees, carefully wiping down the mahogany floorboards when the heavy oak doors swung open. Damien Russo walked in. He didn't look like the polished billionaire from the magazine covers. His tie was ripped off, his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his knuckles were split and bleeding. He radiated a dark, violent energy that seemed to suck the oxygen straight out of the room. He marched over to his crystal decanter, poured a generous splash of 20-year-old Macallan, and downed it in one terrifying gulp. When he turned around, his cold, slate-grey eyes locked onto Clara. Any other maid would have gasped, apologized profusely, and scrambled out of the room in sheer terror. Clara simply paused, her wiping sat back on her heels, and looked back at him. She didn't flinch at the sight of his bloody knuckles. She didn't cower. "Get out!" Damien growled his voice, a low, gravelly threat that usually sent grown men fleeing. Clara calmly wrung out her microfiber cloth into her bucket. "I'm not finished, Mr. Russo. The agency protocol says this room must be finalized before I clock out." Damien froze. For a second, utter disbelief flashed across his face. No one spoke to him like that. He took a slow, predatory step toward her, towering over her small frame. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You're the man who pays my agency, who in turn pays me," Clara said evenly, rising to her feet. She was barely 5'3", but her posture was made of steel. And right now you're tracking blood onto a rug I just spent 20 minutes vacuuming. If you don't mind, sir, I'd like to finish my job so I can go see my brother." Damien stared at her. He looked at her worn-out sneakers, her faded uniform, and the dark circles of exhaustion under her striking amber eyes. Instead of the fury he expected to feel, something else entirely ignited in his chest. Fascination. In a world full of sycophants, terrified enemies, and women who threw themselves at his wealth, this poor, overworked maid was looking at the most dangerous man in New York like he was nothing but an inconvenience. "What is your name?" he demanded. "Clara." "Well, Clara," Damien murmured suddenly, pulling a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket and wrapping it around his bleeding hand. "Finish your job." Instead of leaving, Damien sat in his leather armchair, watching her in complete silence. He watched the meticulous way she moved, the quiet dignity in her labor, and the absolute refusal to acknowledge his intimidating presence. By the time Clara packed up her supplies and walked out the door without a backward glance, Damien Rousseau's world had irreparably shifted. He was a man who conquered whatever he desired, and as he watched the door click shut, he decided he wanted Clara Hayes. The shift in the penthouse was immediate and suffocating. Clara went from being an invisible ghost to the center of a very dangerous man's universe. It started with small, terrifyingly expensive gestures. A week after the incident in the library, Clara found a velvet box sitting on her cleaning cart. Inside was a flawless $50,000 Cartier watch with a simple note for your overtime. Dr. Clara didn't even blink. She walked directly into Damien's empty office, placed the velvet box squarely in the center of his massive glass desk, and went back to scrubbing the guest bathrooms. A few days later, a private car was waiting for her outside the service entrance of the building. The driver, a mountain of a man in a black suit, tipped his hat. "Mr. Rousseau insists you shouldn't be taking the subway at this hour, Miss Hayes." Clara politely declined, zipped up her cheap winter coat, and walked 3 blocks in the freezing rain to the subway station. Damien was intoxicated by her resistance. Every no was a spark dropped into a pool of gasoline. He began adjusting his own schedule just to be in the penthouse when she was there. He would sit at the kitchen island drinking coffee, watching her as she worked. He asked her questions, probing, relentless questions about her life, her dreams, and her brother. Clara answered politely, but kept her walls fortified. She knew exactly what Damien was. She had seen the news reports of a local union leader who opposed Rousseau Holdings, suddenly ending up at the bottom of the East River. She wasn't blinded by his handsome face or his billions. To Clara, he was a monster in a tailored suit. Then the ultimate line was crossed. Clara arrived at Mount Sinai Hospital for her Sunday visit with Tommy, only to find his cramped shared room completely empty. Panic seized her throat. She sprinted to the nurse's station, tears already burning her eyes, demanding to know where her brother was. "Miss Hayes, please calm down." The head nurse smiled gently. "Your brother has been moved to the VIP pediatrics wing. Dr. Gallagher was able to secure the experimental immunotherapy treatment from Switzerland. The entire bill for the past 3 years and the next 5 has been paid in full." Clara's blood ran cold. Paid by who? An anonymous private donor through a corporate trust. Clara didn't go to the VIP wing. She turned on her heel, walked out of the hospital, and took a cab straight to Tribeca. She bypassed the service elevator, swiped her master keycard, and took the private lift straight to the penthouse. Damien was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the Manhattan skyline, a glass of bourbon in his hand. He turned as the elevator doors chimed open, a smug, possessive smile playing on his lips. He expected her to run into his arms. He expected tears of gratitude. Instead, Clara marched across the room and slapped him across the face. The crack echoed through the massive living room. Damien's security detail, 2 armed men in the shadows, instantly drew their weapons. Damien raised a single hand, stopping them cold. He touched his jaw, his eyes darkening, with a mixture of shock and dark amusement. "You don't own me!" Clara screamed, her voice breaking with rage. "You think you can just buy my brother's life? You think you can buy me with your blood money? I saved his life, Clara." Damien said, his voice terrifyingly calm. He took a step toward her, his towering presence overwhelming. "I did with a single phone call what you couldn't do in 3 years of scrubbing my floors. I can give you the world. I can give Tommy a future. All you have to do is let me." "Let you what?" she spat back. "Become another piece of property in your penthouse. Become the mafia boss's little pet. Become my wife." Damien corrected his tone, turning deadly serious. Clara froze. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Damien reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small black box. He snapped it open. Inside sat a 10-carat emerald-cut diamond from Harry Winston. It was blinding. It was worth more than a city block. "I don't date Clara. I don't court. When I find something that belongs to me, I claim it." Damien said, his eyes burning into hers. "Marry me. You will never lift a finger again. Your brother will have the best doctors on the planet. You will be the queen of this city. Anyone who has ever looked down on you will bow." For a moment, there was absolute silence. The offer was a masterclass in manipulation. He was dangling the life of her sick brother and a life of unimaginable luxury right in front of her face. Any other woman would have said yes before the box was even fully open. Clara looked at the ring. Then she looked up into the cold, calculating eyes of the man holding it. She thought about the blood on his knuckles. She thought about the whispers of the widows he had created to build his empire. No. The word was quiet, but it hit the room like a bomb. Damien's smile vanished. "What did you say?" "I said no." Clara repeated, her voice steadying. "You think this is a fairy tale? You're a criminal, Damien. You hurt people. You destroy families. I don't care how much money you have. I would rather scrub floors until my hands fall off. I would rather drown in debt than ever be tied to a man like you. Keep your ring. Keep your money. I quit. Gambobov." She unclipped her employee badge, dropped it onto the pristine marble floor, and turned her back on the most dangerous man in America. She walked into the elevator and pressed the lobby button. As the doors began to close, she saw Damien standing perfectly still, the ring box still in his hand. He wasn't screaming. He wasn't throwing things. He was just watching her, his face, a terrifying, emotionless mask. Clara thought she had won. She thought she had walked away with her soul intact. She didn't realize that you don't just walk away from a man like Damien Rousseau. When the king is rejected by a pawn, he doesn't just clear the board. He sets the whole world on fire. And what Damien did next wasn't just a petty revenge plot. It was a calculated, globe-spanning retaliation that would drag Clara out of the shadows, shock the global elite, and force her to realize that the game had only just begun. Clara expected the retaliation to be swift and brutal. When you humiliate a man who orders executions with his morning espresso, you prepare for the worst. She expected to be evicted from her tiny, drafty apartment in Astoria. She expected her bank accounts to be frozen, her brother to be thrown out of Mount Sinai, and her own life to be snuffed out in some quiet, dark alley. But the next morning, Clara woke up and the world was exactly the same. Her rent was paid. Tommy was still receiving his VIP treatments, courtesy of an unbreakable, legally binding, irrevocable trust that Damien had established hours before her rejection. Clara found a job the very next day at a quiet, family-owned bakery in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. For 2 weeks, there was total agonizing silence. No black SUVs idling outside her apartment. No ominous bouquets of dead roses. Just silence. Then, on a crisp Tuesday morning, the world exploded. Clara was wiping down the bakery counter when she glanced at the small television mounted in the corner. Every major news network, CNN, Fox, Bloomberg, and BBC, had interrupted their standard broadcasting. The ticker at the bottom of the screen flashed in urgent blood-red text. Breaking news. Russo Holdings CEO cooperates with U.S. Justice Department. Unprecedented crackdown on global syndicates. Clara dropped her rag. The volume was low, but she strained to listen as a frantic reporter stood outside the federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan. In a move that has sent shockwaves through global financial markets and the criminal underworld alike, billionaire Damien Russo has reportedly handed over a massive cache of encrypted hard drives to the Southern District of New York. Sources confirm that Russo has turned state's witness, providing irrefutable evidence against 4 of the largest crime families operating on the eastern seaboard, effectively dismantling his own shadow empire. Clara stared at the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't petty revenge. This wasn't stalking. This was a man setting fire to his own throne. Damien was a king, and because Clara had refused to be his queen in a kingdom built on blood, he had decided to burn the kingdom to the ground. Over the next 48 hours, the geopolitical landscape of New York shifted violently. The FBI conducted simultaneous raids across 3 states. Rival bosses, corrupt politicians, and cartel liaisons were dragged out of their mansions in handcuffs. Damien Russo's name was on the lips of every anchor journalist and citizen. To the public, he was a reformed vigilante, a ruthless businessman who had seen the light. But Clara knew the truth. This was a message written in the ashes of his enemies, broadcasted globally, meant entirely for an audience of 1. The sheer scale of Damien's pivot was staggering. Within a month, the business sections of major newspapers were meticulously documenting the transformation of his empire. When Clara saw the name of the foundation, the Hayes Foundation, she nearly collapsed. He had named his massive, world-changing charitable trust after her. It wasn't a secret. It was a massive, blinding spotlight. He was legally untouchable, having negotiated blanket immunity for his cooperation, but in the criminal underworld, he had painted a massive target on his own back. He had betrayed the Cosa Nostra. He had betrayed the cartels. He was a dead man walking, and Clara realized with a sickening drop in her stomach that by becoming his glaring weakness, she was in the crosshairs too. One evening in late December, Clara was leaving the bakery. The streets were coated in a thick, icy slush. As she locked the front door, she felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She wasn't alone. Stepping out from the shadows of an adjacent alleyway were 3 men. They didn't look like petty muggers. They wore dark trench coats, their eyes dead and focused. Clara recognized the insignia tattooed on the neck of the closest man, a broken cross, the hallmark of the Calabrese family, the most vicious of the syndicates Damien had just decimated. Clara Hayes. The man purred, stepping into the dim glow of the street lamp. Russo took our livelihood. Our boss is looking at life in Rikers because of that rat. So we figured we'd take the one thing he seems to care about. Clara backed up against the frosted glass of the bakery door, her breath pluming in the freezing air. She had nowhere to run. The street was deserted. "You're making a mistake," Clara said, trying to keep her voice from trembling. I don't mean anything to him. I rejected him." The man laughed, pulling a suppressed pistol from his coat. The man liquidated a $1 billion smuggling ring and named a hospital wing after you, sweetheart. You mean everything to him." He raised the gun. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the end. Crack, crack. The sound of 2 suppressed shots echoed through the quiet street, but the pain never came. Clara opened her eyes. The man who had been aiming at her dropped to the concrete, clutching his knee, screaming in agony. The other 2 men spun around, raising their weapons, but they were too slow. From the shadows across the street, an armored, matte-black SUV had silently pulled up. The doors burst open, and a squad of heavily armed private security contractors swarmed the street, pinning the remaining 2 assassins to the ground before they could even pull their triggers. And then, walking through the sleet, completely unbothered by the chaos around him, was Damien. He wore a tailored cashmere overcoat, his hands casually tucked into his pockets. He didn't look at the bleeding men on the ground. His slate-grey eyes were locked entirely on Clara. "I told you," Damien said, softly, stopping a few feet away from her. "I don't court. I protect what is mine." Clara stood frozen, her chest heaving, as the adrenaline crashed through her system. The street was quickly and quietly cleared by Damien's men. The assassins were thrown into the back of an unmarked van, destined for a very dark, very unpleasant interrogation. "You followed me," Clara whispered, her voice laced with a mixture of shock and lingering terror. "I have had a detail on you since the day you walked out of my penthouse." Damien replied, his tone conversational, as if they were discussing the weather. "Did you really think I would let you wander the city unprotected, while I systematically dismantled the most dangerous organizations in the country? You dismantled them because of me." Damien took a step closer. The dangerous, violent aura that had always surrounded him was still there, but it was tempered by something new, something raw. "You told me I was a monster," Damien said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "You said I destroyed families. You said you would rather drown in debt than be tied to a man with blood money." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "So I got rid of the blood money. I burned the underworld to the ground. I legitimized every asset I own. I am no longer a criminal, Clara." Clara shook her head in disbelief. "You risked your life. You risked a gang war. You tore apart your entire life, just to prove a point." "Not to prove a point," Damien corrected gently. "To make myself worthy of you." He didn't reach for her. He didn't try to intimidate her. For the first time since she had met him, the Billionaire Mafia boss was completely unguarded. "I have spent my entire life taking what I want through force and fear." Damien continued, the snow catching in his dark hair. "When you looked me in the eye and told me, no, it was the first time in my life someone demanded better of me. You didn't want my wealth, you wanted my humanity. So I found it." Clara stared at him. The sheer magnitude of his actions weighed heavily on her. This wasn't a fairy tale romance. This was a man who had reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the East Coast just to clear his ledger. "You named a foundation after me," she breathed. "You put a target on my back." "I put a shield over you," Damien countered fiercely. "The Hayes Foundation is a legal fortress, and the men who tried to touch you tonight, they are the last desperate remnants of a dying breed. By tomorrow morning, the Calabrese family will cease to exist. I will ensure it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy stock paper. He held it out to her. Clara hesitated before taking it. She unfolded it under the flickering street lamp. It was a deed, a legally binding document transferring 70% of Russo Holdings, his legitimate, clean, multi-billion-dollar corporate empire into her name. "What is this?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "It's a surrender," Damien said quietly. "If I go back to my old ways, if I ever lie to you, if I ever hurt innocent people again, you have the legal authority to liquidate my entire life. You hold the leash, Clara." The ultimate checkmate. He hadn't cornered her with threats or violence. He had cornered her with absolute, terrifying vulnerability. He had given her the one thing no one in his world ever gave away complete power. "And Tommy?" she asked, tears finally pricking her eyes. "Tommy's scans came back clear this morning." Damien smiled softly. "Dr. Gallagher says the immunotherapy worked. He's going into remission." Clara let out a choked sob, the heavy burden she had carried for 3 years. The exhaustion, the terror, the poverty seemed to shatter all at once. She looked at the deed in her hand, and then up at the man who had torn the world apart just to put it back together for her. "You are completely insane," Clara whispered, stepping toward him. "I am completely yours," Damien replied. 5 years later. The charity gala at the Metropolitan Museum of Art was the social event of the season. Governors, tech moguls, and European royalty mingled under the vaulted ceilings, drinking champagne and bidding millions on contemporary art. At the center of the room stood Clara Russo. She wore a custom Vera Wang gown that flowed like liquid silver, her hair pinned up elegantly, the 10-carat Harry Winston diamond sparkling on her left hand. She wasn't a ghost anymore. She was the CEO of the Hayes Foundation, a powerhouse philanthropist who commanded respect from everyone she met. Beside her, holding a glass of sparkling water, was Damien. He was still a billionaire, still a force of nature, but the dark, violent shadows that used to haunt his eyes were gone. He looked at his wife with a reverence that bordered on worship. A young boy, now 11 years old and brimming with healthy energy, ran up to them, dodging a waiter, holding a tray of caviar. "Clara, Damien, they're about to start the auction for the Ferrari." Tommy beamed, tugging on Damien's tuxedo sleeve. "Are they?" Damien chuckled, ruffling the boy's hair. "Well, we better go bid on it before some hedge fund manager beats us to it." As Damien walked ahead with Tommy, Clara watched them. She thought back to the cold, lonely nights scrubbing the floors of that penthouse. She thought about the terrifying proposal she had rejected and the global shockwave that had followed. She had rejected a mafia boss. She had refused to be a pawn in his violent world. In response, he hadn't broken her. He had broken the world, rebuilt it, and handed her the crown. And as Damien turned back, offering her his hand with a warm, genuine smile, Clara took it, knowing that sometimes the most powerful word a woman can say to a monster is simply no. What an incredible journey of power redemption and setting boundaries. Clara proved that true strength isn't about the money you have, but the morals you refuse to compromise. Damien's world-shaking transformation shows that even the darkest hearts can change when confronted with undeniable courage. If this intense, dramatic romance kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this story with your friends and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling tales.